The wind was sharp that morning, carrying with it the brittle smell of snow and wood smoke. When a lone cowboy rode slowly into the outskirts of a small frontier town, his hat tilted low to shield his eyes from the rising sun, his long duster coat trailing dust and frost behind the tired hooves of his horse, a faithful bay that had carried him across endless miles of barren plains and jagged hills. The man's name was Caleb Boone, and he had long since stopped counting the number of towns he had wandered through. Places that blurred into one another, each with its saloon, its general store, its boarded sidewalks, and its gossiping people who always turned to watch the stranger on horseback. Caleb wasn't looking for company, for friendship, or for a story. He had only come for supplies. A bag of flour, some beans, a little salt pork, a box of cartridges to keep the wolves and outlaws away when the nights grew long and dangerous. But fate, with its cruel and unexpected hand, had other plans that morning. And everything changed the moment he spotted her in front of the town bakery, crouched in the snow, her trembling hands gathering scattered loaves and carrots that had spilled from a toppled barrel, her bare feet red with cold, her wedding dress tattered and torn, and her face, though gaunt with hunger and pale from the wind, still holding on to a fragile kind of beauty that pierced through Caleb's hardened heart like a knife. She looked up at him then, her dark eyes wide and desperate, and in a voice so faint it almost disappeared into the crunch of boots on snow, she whispered, "Please, sir, just a piece of bread." And the sound of it, the pleading wrapped in shame and hope, struck him deeper than any bullet ever had, for Caleb knew hunger. He had felt it in the lonely camps under the stars when winter gave no mercy, and he had seen women left behind, abandoned, sold, or traded like cattle in towns where law was weak and men with money thought they could own everything, including brides. He dismounted without a word, his spurs jingling softly, and crouched beside her, noting the lace veil tangled in her hair and the way her thin fingers clutched at a crust of bread as if it were gold. And he asked her quietly, "What happened to you?" But before she could answer, the baker himself stormed out, a stout man dusted with flour who waved his arms and barked, "Away with you, girl. You scare off my customers. You've no coin and no right to sit on my steps." His voice cruel and loud enough to draw the stares of passers-by who paused, whispered, and then moved on, unwilling to intervene. Caleb stood, his tall frame casting a shadow over the baker, and in that deep, calm tone that carried a weight heavier than shouting, he said, "She's with me," before tossing a silver coin into the man's hand and adding, "Now give her enough bread to last a week." And though the baker scowled, he obeyed, returning inside and coming back with a sack of loaves, which the girl clutched to her chest as tears welled in her eyes. But Caleb didn't linger for gratitude. He simply took her elbow gently and guided her to the side alley where the wind was less biting. And there she told him her name, Evelyn Grace, and her story came pouring out in broken fragments about how she had been promised in marriage to a wealthy cattle baron twice her age, a man with a cruel reputation and fists as heavy as stone, how her stepfather had forced her into the match to settle debts, and how, on the day of her wedding, she had run, still in the dress, clutching nothing but the hope she could find kindness somewhere beyond the church walls. But there was no kindness, only hunger, cold nights sleeping in barns and doors slammed in her face until finally she had collapsed here, in this town, too weak to keep going. Caleb listened in silence, his jaw tight, for her story was not uncommon, yet there was something about Evelyn's voice that made it impossible for him to walk away. Something that reminded him of the younger sister he had lost years ago when bandits raided their homestead, leaving only ashes behind, and as the memory surged up in him like wildfire, he made a decision that would alter both their paths. He told her she could come with him, that he didn't have much, only a cabin up north and a life on the trail, but she would not starve nor freeze, and though she stared at him with disbelief, thinking perhaps it was another kind of trap, she saw in his weathered face no hunger for ownership, only a tired man offering what little light he still carried in a dark world. So she nodded, clutching the bread to her chest, and whispered, "Thank you," as though the words were sacred. That night, in a dim room of the boarding house, with the sound of a storm rattling the shutters, Evelyn slept for the first time in weeks without fear, while Caleb sat by the window, keeping watch, his revolver on the table, wondering why fate had chosen this moment, this meeting, and knowing deep down that the road ahead would not be simple. For men like the cattle baron she fled from did not forgive humiliation, and hungry brides begging for bread seldom vanished unnoticed in towns where rumors traveled faster than the wind. The following days passed in a blur of whispers and uneasy glances, for word of the starving bride taken in by a lone cowboy spread quickly through the dusty little town, some folks shaking their heads and muttering that she was cursed, others marveling at the boldness of the stranger who had dared to shield her. But Caleb Boone cared little for their opinions, his focus fixed on the woman whose fragile strength reminded him daily that even the hardest winters could not kill the will to survive. Evelyn, though weak from hunger, began to recover slowly, her cheeks gaining color as she ate warm meals bought with Caleb's coin, her eyes lighting up whenever she caught the faintest glimpse of kindness in a world that had shown her only cruelty. And yet in her heart, shadows remained, for she knew the man she had fled, the cattle baron named Royce Maddox, was not one to forgive or forget. His wealth and power stretching far beyond the county lines, and if he ever discovered her whereabouts, he would come with iron and fire to reclaim what he considered his property. Caleb understood this truth as well, for he had seen men like Maddox before, men who thought their gold bought them the right to crush others beneath their boots. And so one morning, as frost still glazed the windows of the boarding house, Caleb saddled his horse and told Evelyn it was time to leave, that the town was too small to keep secrets for long, and the wilderness, harsh as it was, offered more safety than the prying eyes of gossipers. She hesitated, afraid of the unknown trails, but when he held out his calloused hand, she placed hers in it, trusting him with a faith she barely understood herself, and together they rode out, the cold wind stinging their faces as they left the crooked wooden buildings and watchful stairs behind, heading north toward the mountains where Caleb's cabin waited, a lonely shack built from logs and sweat hidden by pines and silence. The journey was not easy, for snowdrifts blocked paths, wolves howled at night, and the icy rivers tested the strength of both horse and rider. Yet with each mile, Evelyn grew stronger, her spirit no longer bowed beneath fear, and Caleb, though a man of few words, found himself speaking more than he had in years, telling her stories of the trail, of the stars that guided him, and of the family he once had, while she listened with quiet wonder, realizing that beneath the hardened exterior was not just a gunslinger, but a soul who carried scars deeper than his weathered skin revealed. Days turned into weeks, and the two of them settled into a rhythm, cooking by the fire, mending clothes, and watching the wilderness transform under snow and sunlight. And in those moments, something unspoken began to grow between them, fragile as new grass after a storm, yet steady as the mountains themselves, though neither dared to name it aloud, for fear that speaking it would break the spell. But peace is a rare gift on the frontier, and it was shattered the day a rider appeared on the horizon, his fine horse snorting steam, his polished boots gleaming even in the frost. And when Caleb lifted his rifle and watched through narrowed eyes, he knew without a doubt that Royce Maddox had sent his men, hunters paid to drag Evelyn back in chains. The first man came alone, arrogant and smirking, calling out threats about the Baron's claim, but Caleb's warning shot split the snow at his feet, sending the rider scrambling away. And though victory felt sweet, it was only a prelude, for within days more riders came armed and determined, surrounding the cabin in the dead of night, their laughter and curses echoing through the trees as they demanded Evelyn be handed over. She clutched Caleb's arm, trembling, but his voice was steady when he said, "You're not going back, not while I draw breath." And the battle that followed was as brutal as any war he had ever fought. Bullets tearing through wood, firelight flashing on steel, And in the chaos, Caleb fought like a man possessed, his revolver blazing until the barrel smoked, his determination fueled not by anger alone, but by the fierce need to protect the woman who had come to mean more to him than his own life. And when the smoke cleared, the snow was stained crimson, the attackers driven off with their pride broken, though Caleb himself carried a wound in his side, shallow but bleeding. Evelyn wept as she bound it, whispering prayers she had long forgotten, and when he looked into her eyes through the haze of pain, he saw not the starving bride he had first met in the snow, but a woman of fire and strength, reborn from her suffering, and in that gaze he found something he had thought forever lost, hope. The days after the fight were filled with healing, both of wounds and of spirits, and though they knew Royce Maddox might yet come himself with greater force, neither Caleb nor Evelyn spoke of surrender, for they had chosen their path, together, against the world if need be. And in the quiet moments, by the fire or beneath the stars, Evelyn would sometimes take Caleb's hand, holding it as though anchoring herself to the earth. And he, once a man cursed to wander alone, realized that for the first time in years, he no longer felt the gnawing emptiness of solitude, for beside him was someone worth fighting for, worth living for, and perhaps even worth dying for if the time came. And so, the tale of the lonely cowboy who rode into town for nothing more than supplies, but found instead a starving bride begging for bread, became something greater than chance. It became a story of how two broken souls collided in the bitter snow and chose to build a life in defiance of the cruelty around them. A story whispered in towns and saloons, passed from mouth to mouth as both warning and legend, that even in the harshest lands, where hunger and greed ruled, love and courage could still rise, unstoppable as the dawn over the wild frontier.